stand. Good afternoon, I'm Mark DeGraff, president of your Rotary Club. Welcome. Today we're going to do one verse of America with First Hoffman on the piano.
The sweet land of liberty, I say, land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrims bright, from every mountainside, let freedom ring.
Thank you, Hurst. And now our own Joan Wagner is going to handle guest introductions and our Rotary Minute. Joan?
Next week is our Christmas party. How many of you have been to Christmas parties in years past where we have all brought grandchildren? That used to be the custom. We have a picture of Kirk Johnson. Is Kirk here? I'm going to steal his thunder a little bit, showing his 2-year-old coming to the Rotary party. And I dutifully dragged my grandchildren for years to the Rotary party. We're going to do something different this time. I'm bringing my grandson, but he's going to be singing with the Seaman Show Choir. And he's the cute kid in the front row, in case anybody won't be able to spot him. But next week is going to be a very special time. Not only are we going to have some holiday celebration and good music, but we're going to recognize people who have done nice things for the club. So I hope you'll make a plan to be here. If you want to bring your grandchildren, that's probably okay. They'll enjoy the Seaman Show Choir, but there won't be a magician, there won't be a Santa Claus. It'll just be honoring our Rotary members for the good works that they've done throughout the year. I'm pleased to say that Jay Bedford has 2 guests. Jay, you have Shelley Woodard and John Noble. Would you introduce them?
I'd be glad to, Joe. It's my distinct honor to introduce a couple guests that I brought here. One is Shelley Woodard.
Hi, Shelley.
She is an attorney, a recent KU graduate. She spent 7 years in the service of the country with the United States Army. It happens to also be her husband is here, John Noble. John Noble is an attorney with the Kansas Attorney General's office. He is a 2010 graduate of Washington University Law School. A little difference here, one's a Jayhawk, one's a Big Five. He went to K-State as undergraduate, so welcome him. Thank you.
Hi, John.
Thank you. Please give our Rotary guests a warm Rotary welcome. Folks, we have just a couple of quick announcements. Our December featured charity is the United Way Christmas Bureau. If you're interested in giving the Rotary Minute guest introductions like Joan just did, please contact Linda. We have an announcement of the slate of officers for the Topeka Rotary Foundation for a 3-year term. Joan Wagman, Carol Wheeler, and Bob Closhen. And with that announced, I'll open nominations from the floor.
Move the nominations be closed.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. We'll vote on those next week by paper ballot. Thank you very much. And next up we have William Battetta with a blue badge presentation for a couple of our new members.
Thank you, President Mark. If Allison Marker and Orion Jordan would come forward, please. As they're coming forward, a reminder to everyone and to explain to anyone who's new and visiting our club. Our Red Badge, Blue Badge program is intended to introduce new members to the Rotary Club in the best way possible. Each new member starts by completing 5 activities of attending an orientation, participate in a service project, serve as a greeter, contribute to the Rotary International Foundation or the local foundation, and update their profile on the club website. Then they choose from 3 other activities, ways to serve the club to earn their blue badge. Today we're presenting blue badge to Allison Marker, who was sponsored by Kathleen Marker, otherwise known as Mom. Allison is the Resource Development Director for the YWCA in Northeast Kansas, and she completed the following: introduced guests and presented the Rotary Minute. She attended the district reception for Blanche Parks. She's on the district team training, attended the district team training and established her account on at Rotary International. Allison has volunteered for the mentoring project at Highland Park and will be participating in the club's Peace Project. Orion Jordan, sponsored by Carol Jordan, otherwise known as his wife. Orion is retired from government service. What type of service?
Department of Administration.
Department of Administration, okay. And Orion volunteered for the Freedom Festival and attended the district team training in Lawrence. He has earned his blue badge by, not just by doing this, but has been participating in many, many hours for the planning of the 2019 district conference. And is on the committee with Anita Wolgass, planning the year-end celebration for District Governor Blank. And then, yes, thank you for both of you for everything you've done. So with that, members of the Downtown Rotary Club, would you please stand and congratulate Allison and Orion on earning the blue badge.
Okay, we have a new member application that came in from Brandy Brown. She's with Johnson Storage and Moving. She's a relocation specialist. She is sponsored by our own Dick Knoll, and she's interested in membership, community service, international service, and fellowship. This year we sent 2 applications to the Outbound Rotary Youth Exchange Program, and David Beck has shepherded those through. Both of the Topeka Rotary Youth Exchange applicants to study abroad have been selected for next school year. Our district will be sending 12 students abroad in total, and so having 2 from our club is quite impressive, and David's done some great work yet again this year on that. Isabel, or Izzy Fritz, is a student at Washburn Rural High School. She's been accepted for an exchange in Austria. You may remember her older brother studied in Spain several years ago, and she will spend her senior year there. And then Amarachi is a student from Topeka High, and she's been accepted for an exchange year in Taiwan. This will be Amarachi's second exchange. Her junior year she spent in Japan, and the Taiwan exchange will be a gap year placement for her. Please join me in congratulating these outstanding students and wish them well. And also, next time you see David Beck, thank him for his good work in shepherding those applicants through the Rotary program. And with that said, it's my pleasure to introduce Allison Marker to the stage for the second time this morning to introduce our speaker today. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you, Mark. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Jennifer Montgomery. Jennifer began working on human trafficking issues in the office of Kansas Attorney General Derek Schmidt in 2013. She currently leads the Attorney General's anti-human trafficking efforts as Director of Human Trafficking Education and Outreach. She is an author and has provided presentations and trainings on human trafficking to healthcare professionals, law enforcement officers, school administrators, members of the business community, students, faith community, and nonprofit leaders, and members of the public. Her latest published work is the chapter Providing Effective Services to Victims of Human Trafficking, Theoretical, Practical, and Ethical Considerations. This is in the publication Combating Human Trafficking, a Multidisciplinary Approach. She has served as a guest instructor for undergraduate and graduate level courses on social justice and human trafficking at the University of St. Mary in Leavenworth and the University of Kansas in Lawrence. Through her life experience and professional work, Jennifer is a passionate advocate for women and girls who have experienced sexual abuse and exploitation. Additionally, Jennifer serves as the Public Information Officer and Chief Spokesperson for the Attorney General's Office. A fourth-generation Kansan and KU graduate, she returned to Kansas after working in Washington, D.C. as a congressional staffer for the Kansas delegation and holding various positions in government affairs and public relations in the U.S. and Europe. Jennifer volunteers as a Shawnee County CASA Citizens Review Board member and as a mentor with the Kansas Women's Leadership Institute at the University of Kansas. She is currently Vice Chair of the Board of Directors of Freedom Now USA, an anti-human trafficking nonprofit organization affiliated with the Topeka Rescue Mission. Join me in welcoming Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Allison, for the nice introduction, and thank you so much, Stan, for the kind invitation to come and talk to your group today. I've spoken to the other Rotary groups in the Topeka area, the North location and the West group, but I have not yet been to the downtown Rotary, and I've heard it's the largest, and I can see that definitely today. And I also see many familiar faces, which is nice. I understand that you all have had a presentation previously from another Rotarian, Patty Mellard, from the West Club. From the South Club. Thank you. Who gave you a lot of information on human trafficking, and I was told focused a lot on the vulnerabilities associated with sex trafficking victims. So today I'm going to share a little bit more about labor trafficking, because I thought as business owners, part of the business community, you all might be interested in some of the issues that are part of labor trafficking that we see here in Kansas and also across the country. So I'm going to speak quickly because I have a lot of information to share with you. And at the end, I hope to have time to take some questions from you. So as you all probably know, human trafficking is based on recruiting, harboring, and or transporting people solely for the purpose of exploitation. The two types of human trafficking that we see are labor trafficking and sex trafficking. The common denominator in these situations is that the person involved, the victim, has no freedom to leave the situation. And the trafficking industry thrives on people, members of the public, being uneducated about what human trafficking looks like in their communities, and so therefore they're not reporting human trafficking. I like to always talk about the differences between human smuggling and human trafficking at the beginning. I think the media sometimes does a disservice to this by calling things human trafficking that sometimes are really human smuggling. A good way to remember the difference between the two crimes is that human trafficking is always a crime against a person, whereas human smuggling is a crime against a border. Sometimes they overlap or they intersect. That's definitely the case in many instances, but they are two separate crimes. So what do we see in our state of Kansas as far as human trafficking goes? We know that more than 80% of human trafficking victims involve domestic victims. So that means victims who have been born here in the United States. And the majority of those victims are children. The U.S. Department of Justice has identified Kansas as an originating state for human trafficking. What that means is a lot of victims of human trafficking are recruited here in our state and either trafficked in Kansas or taken across the border to Missouri or trafficked on the east and west coasts of the United States. So the originating terminology means that it's the children from our communities who are being lured into trafficking and trafficked across our country. Because of this, we have adopted new laws to help protect victims and obviously prosecute the traffickers who are perpetrating these crimes. So why are we seeing human trafficking in Kansas? Why Kansas? Why do we have this situation here? I will tell you, first of all, it is not just in Kansas. It's in every state in the United States. I would argue it's in every country. A little side note on that, I recently returned about 8 days ago from a mission trip to Rwanda in Africa. And in advance of my trip, I did a lot of research about how the country has fared as far as the trafficking in persons report that the State Department puts out each year. How are they doing on trafficking there? I have a friend who I've known for several years who is from Rwanda, so I contacted her to ask her some questions about child protection issues in their country. She's not currently living there, but she has family members that are there. And her response to me was a very quick, well, we don't have that problem in our country. We wouldn't have something such as human trafficking going on in our country. Our country is different. We have X, Y, and Z. And I found that very interesting because, you know, from my experience in my work in this area, we see human trafficking in every state and in virtually every country. So I was very interested to go and see for myself. It was an eye-opening experience, and I was able to talk to some NGOs and some other groups, nonprofit groups and other folks there about their child protection laws and how they try to assist vulnerable kids. But that's another presentation for another day. Because we are centrally located in the United States, that makes us the hub of Midwestern commerce. So obviously we have a lot of interstates that run through Kansas. Sometimes these rest stops, truck stops along our roadways and highways are used by traffickers as exchange points, where they deliver victims to another trafficker. Many of these trafficking situations are not individuals involved in trafficking on their own. They're part of large criminal networks that operate across the United States. Many times gangs are involved in this kind of thing too. Drug trafficking was the crime of opportunity for gang members for many years. Now human trafficking, the trafficking in persons, has become just as popular. Why? Because you can only sell a drug one time, then you have to resupply. Unfortunately, you can sell an individual over and over and over again, so it makes it easier in that aspect. Whoops. People ask frequently, what are the statistics on human trafficking in Kansas? How many cases are we seeing? How many individuals are victimized? Those numbers, I'll be quite honest, are very hard to come by. Statistics in this area are elusive because of the underground nature of the crime of human trafficking. Our office collects every year data from our grant recipients, who we provide grants for all kinds of victim services. And back in 2009, the office started asking, have you served a victim of human trafficking during that particular fiscal year? And as you can see, that number was very slim. I believe it was 2 victims were identified as coming in for services during that fiscal year. That number has steadily rose, and now we're up over 470 individuals being identified in the most previous fiscal year as coming in and identifying themselves as having been a victim of human trafficking. So while that number is growing, I would argue it's not just the increase in human trafficking crimes in Kansas, it's also the increase in awareness. Groups like yours, Rotary, who has been very active in the fight against human trafficking, and other groups have really done a good job going out and educating the public, educating their membership on what human trafficking looks like, what are the signs, and how to report it. So I think it's a combination of things that has made this number grow over the years. So the characteristics, let's talk about sex trafficking victims first. The average age of entry is around 14 years old. Many of these victims have had previous sexual abuse in their history, in their childhood. Many are runaways or youth who have been in and out of the foster care system. Those are some very high vulnerability factors that we see in victims of human trafficking. Most are female, but not all. I know Allison could tell you about that, what they're seeing at the YWCA. Victims are male, female, all kinds of different backgrounds that come in for services. The common thing is that they're not likely to consider themselves a victim. That's very important because it makes it difficult to provide services to individuals if they don't necessarily acknowledge or understand that they're being manipulated by a trafficker or victimized. So that's a very common thing that we see when working with victims of human trafficking. Some of the other obstacles to identification, they almost never self-identify. They view the trafficker as a boyfriend or girlfriend. Many of these relationships, as I'm sure Patty had mentioned, start as romantic relationships between an older individual and a younger person. And they groom them that way over time, giving them gifts, taking them places, and then at some point it changes and they're asking them for repayment of those gifts or those favors. And that's when they start to ask and force them to do things that they don't want to do. So that's how these relationships start. They're lured into a false sense of choice. Many have been given new names or branded, and I'll show you what that looks like in a few minutes. They're very fearful of law enforcement, and they're street smart and difficult to interview. Some of the services that are critical for protection once victims are taken out of these trafficking situations, I won't read the whole list, but you can see they range from healthcare needs, especially if they have a chronic or immediate health need, to psychological counseling, not just short-term, but long-term behavioral health, mental health services. Housing is something that we really struggle with here in Kansas, and I know that other states do as well. Currently, we only have one staff secure facility licensed in the state of Kansas to house minor victims of sex trafficking, and that is located as a part of the Wichita Children's Home. That is the only place we have right now that's an official place where we can take victims once they've been rescued out of these situations, and it only has 4 beds. That's not a lot. So that's something that we've been trying to work on as a state over many years, and we hope to really be able to tackle that issue in this new legislative session. Some of the other things: addiction treatment, educational needs, and employment needs, depending on the age of the victim. So what do we know about sex traffickers in particular? These are photos of convicted traffickers in our state, courtesy of the Exploited and Missing Child Unit in Wichita. I like to show this slide because I think it's sort of a wake-up call. We have this perception that pimps or traffickers look like a certain type of person. If you look at these pictures, they look like all of us in this room. They can be any color skin, any color hair, they can be male or female, they can be young or old. Human traffickers are not always strangers or what we think of as a pimp. They can be family members, they can be other people who are associated with young people or young adults. What we do know, some of the statistics are that they're between the ages of 19 and 45. They have a very low level of education. They have a very high level of drug and alcohol use and previous criminal history. And they make a lot of money doing this every year. That's why when I go out and speak to groups, public groups, faith-based groups, I always say this is not a situation, if you see something in progress, that you should go and intervene on your own. It's a very dangerous situation because these individuals are making a lot of money off the backs of these victims. So we always ask that people, if they see something, they call law enforcement and report it. How do traffickers control victims? There are many, many ways. There's the physical abuse, there's sexual abuse, there's psychological and emotional violence that's involved in these relationships. Many times that's just as severe as the physical and sexual abuse. Substance abuse and misuse is always something that's seen because that's how traffickers gain control over their victims in many of these cases. I mentioned the manipulation and romance that often start out in those relationships. And cultural disorientation, we see that both in labor trafficking situations and in sex trafficking situations if the victim is someone who's not from the local area or sometimes not from the United States and English is not their original language. So child trafficking, 2 different types. We see the sex trafficking that involve all of those sorts of activities. And we see child labor trafficking, which can involve involuntary domestic servitude, underage agricultural labor, or peddling, begging on the streets, or traveling sales crews. And I want to talk a little bit about what that is in a few moments. We mentioned some of the vulnerabilities that I know Patty went in depth on. We mentioned the chronic runaways, but I did also want to mention the 6% of all girls in Kansas with a developmental disability. This is one of our most vulnerable groups of youth who are often targeted by traffickers and those who are trying to exploit. Labor trafficking, some of the industries in particular where we see this that make the workers vulnerable, the domestic servitude, agricultural labor, landscaping, construction, those types of industries. Traveling sales crews, how many of you have had somebody ring your doorbell in your neighborhood trying to sell magazines, cleaning supplies, candy, that sort of thing? I see some heads nodding. Yep. So this is something that we've seen a lot of over the past several years in Kansas. We've had an uptick in reports of traveling sales crews. Those are some of the things that they sell. In many of these circumstances, the individuals involved are youth, but older youth. Many of them come from a background of poverty. Sometimes they're kids who have graduated from high school who don't have the money to go to college. They hear through friends, through their peer network, that there's this group, you can go and you can sell stuff and you make a lot of money and it's really fun. In some of these circumstances, the people who are running these networks and are in control of these groups of older youth are very abusive in their practices. They use manipulation and other things to get this group of kids to go and sell. They all have quotas. They walk around with clipboards. They usually have on polo shirts and some sort of badge. They come to your door selling these products. Sometimes this is legitimate. There are some school fundraisers where kids are coming to your door, so I do caution people about that. But in many instances, it is people being exploited through having to make these quotas. Once they've sold something, then all the money goes back to the traffickers to pay for their room and board. They typically don't see that money, and they're under a lot of pressure to make the sales. So let's talk a little bit about supply chain issues, labor trafficking, as far as what we see in the business community. I wanted to mention a case study from 2009, I believe. Some of you may have heard of it, Giant Labor Solutions in Kansas City. There was a federal investigation in 2009. They were indicted under the RICO law for forced labor, racketeering, and immigration violations in 14 states. So it was a network that was based there, and they were trafficking individuals across 14 different states. Local companies hired workers through a staffing agency, and they were unaware of the living conditions and the illegal practices of the agency. Exploitation of foreign workers was involved in this particular case, but sometimes that's not the case. Some of the red flags that are very specific to the business community I wanted to share with you today. How do you determine if a worker is being forced to work against his or her will? The lack of freedom to leave the living or working conditions. If a worker is living on site, we've seen this sometimes at ethnic restaurants. I think there was a case here in Topeka a few years back where that was the case. The people who were working there, who English was not their first language, they were not allowed out very often, and they were living either below or above the business. Those are red flags for exploitation. They have few or no personal possessions or financial records. They're not in control of their own documentation. The person who's employing them holds their passports or their identification or their papers. They don't have a lot of knowledge of the given community, as I mentioned. They owe a large debt and can't pay it off. So every penny they make in their work goes to either the employer or the person that brought them to this employer for the job. They have signs of physical abuse, that kind of thing. They act fearful and anxious, and their personal story is inconsistent, or they claim that they're just visiting the area. So working with staffing agencies in particular, I've done some training for different staffing agencies across the state, and these are some things that are important if you work with staffing agencies in your particular business. Always check to see if the agency is a member of the American Staffing Association. They have a required code of ethics that set protocols and procedures to guard against human trafficking. Keeping your eyes open and an open line of communication with your workers. Know who your workers are. Ask them about their families or what's going on in their lives outside of work. That's how a lot of times you can learn some of this information.
Bear with me.
Okay, that's all right. So far, in what I've said so far, does anyone have any questions? Yes, related to what I've talked about.
Well, I mean, you kind of gave me goosebumps when you said the thing about the kids in polo shirts and cars. I mean, what do I do the next time one of those people comes to my door? Because I'm
Right.
totally familiar with that situation.
Absolutely, and my suggestion would be not to invite them inside, but to ask them questions and try to remember as much information as possible that you can write down after they go on their way, such as, you know, a lot of them have a badge. You could ask, oh, what company do you work for, to try to get some specific information that you can then report. You know, do you live around here? When was the last time you've seen your family? Questions like that to gauge their demeanor. and how they feel about their job. This must be a great job, especially in the summer, or, you know, try to make some conversation to see if you can get some other details about the work that they're doing. And then, obviously, if you can see, I live in Lawrence, and I have seen a van pull up in my neighborhood, and a bunch of these young adults jump out with their polos and their clipboard. If you can get a picture of the van without putting yourself in any danger, or their license plate, that kind of information is critical when you pick up the phone and call local law enforcement and report it. So as much information I always suggest as you can get without putting yourself in harm's way. Okay, let's move on, and then I will be happy to take more questions. Some of the unintended legal consequences for if you are working with staffing agencies or employing people who are in these situations: costly legal troubles for your company, lost business and productivity, and lasting damage to reputation. The Giant Labor Solutions, I mean, that's a good example. You know, that's not a company. When people hear that name, they associate it with, you know, practices that aren't above board. What kind of action can you take as a business? What are some immediate steps your company or organization can take to address human trafficking concerns? You can conduct a risk assessment to evaluate the risk of human trafficking in the context of your company's operations, including its supply chain, including if you do work with staffing agencies or other types of outside organizations. You can develop policies and standards on human trafficking that ensure that prohibitions on trafficking are incorporated into existing human rights policies and standards that your organization already has. That's something easy to add to the protocols or policies that you may already have with your organization. Ensure that the prohibitions on human trafficking and forced labor are included in contractual requirements for contractors and suppliers. This type of thing can go way down the chain. And I guess what I'm telling you is, be sure that you're aware of any other organization's policies and procedures that you contract with or you work with in the type of business that you do. Provide training to managers and employers on how to identify and report the indicators of human trafficking and forced labor. That's an easy thing to do. There are lots of folks that can come out and do training. Identify and engage with relevant industry initiatives and other potential partners that can provide critical support for company training and risk assessment efforts. There are companies that have lots of good guidelines on this particular thing. Some of the corporate initiatives that we've seen across the United States that are really good in this particular area include Delta, Hilton, some of these other ones. There is a Global Business Coalition Against Trafficking that's a great resource to see what they suggest and what their standards are. So something else I want to mention is demand. And what am I talking about when I'm talking about demand in the context of human trafficking? This is an issue that the Attorney General's office has taken on this year, and it's very, very important. Because if we don't go to the root of the problem, which is the demand for commercial sex, we will never reduce human trafficking in our communities, in our state, and in our country. So demand, obviously, is the desire for a particular commodity, labor, or service, whether that's business practices or sexual services. In the context of human trafficking, it's for labor that's exploitative, like we've just been talking about, or services that breach the human rights of the person delivering those services. The slide is eye-opening, I think, to many people. In the context of sex trafficking specifically, the smallest group of people involved are the pimps and traffickers. The next largest group are the victims of human trafficking, of sex trafficking. But the largest number of people involved in sex trafficking specifically are the buyers, those who purchase sex with children and other vulnerable adults. Wow, right? That's eye-opening. If that's the case, what are we going to do about that? And we'll get to that in a minute. Some of the statistics that we know about buyers, 99% are male. The age range is between 18 and 89. 19% of buyers' professions involve working with children, whether it's a coach, a youth pastor, Boy Scout leader, that type of thing. 22% involved a position of authority or trust, attorney, law enforcement, military, that kind of thing. So in July of this year, our office launched the Demand and End campaign. And we partnered with Rotaries, which is awesome. And we partnered with over 70 other organizations across the state of Kansas to demand an end of sexual exploitation of individuals. We kicked this off with that group. The campaign focuses on the buyers. It targets those who buy sex. We've got posters that look like this. You may have seen them around. We're hoping to provide more of those to other organizations. And it's hard to see at the very bottom, but the big part of this particular public awareness campaign is our petition. It's available online. You can go to our website and you can sign the petition saying that you demand an end to the sexual exploitation of individuals in our state. And we're just asking for your name and your county from a drop-down menu. We don't want any of your other personal information. And we're hoping to gather tens of thousands of signatures from Kansas to present to the new governor and the legislature in a couple of months. We're going to let this campaign go through January, which is Human Trafficking Awareness Month here in Kansas and nationally. We have a lot of events scheduled for that month, and we're hoping to get as many signatures as possible. I would be happy to provide a link to that petition or even individual petition pages that your membership can sign. If you're interested in that, I would be happy to send that to you. So that's something to think about. Basically, the big concept here is those who purchase sex fuel the sex industry. They're not two separate things here. Most women in prostitution do not have a choice. Individuals who buy sex always have a choice. There's a real power dynamic disparity in these situations that's important to be aware of. If there were no buyers, there would be no business for the traffickers and no victims of human trafficking. So very briefly, I want to go over a couple of things with our laws. You may have heard Kansas has received an A grade from the big NGO that ranks states' laws as far as how progressive and how well they're doing on human trafficking issues. This is the legal framework. And we started with the letter grade of an F in 2011 when Attorney General Schmidt took office. Kansas's laws regarding human trafficking were an F. And we didn't like that. We thought we could do better. And so we've worked very hard over the last several years, and we've raised that grade as of last year, and we got another A this year, up to an A. And so that's the legislative and the legal framework of how we tackle human trafficking from that perspective. We still need to implement those legislative changes, and that'll take some time. But I wanted to give you a little bit of information on what some of those changes are to the law. We have a Human Trafficking Advisory Board that meets quarterly here in Topeka. It's an open meeting. If you're interested, let me know, and I can let you know when it meets and where it meets. That's made up of all different kinds of folks, different professions. We have survivors of human trafficking on the board, and we discuss policy and changes that need to be made to our laws each quarter. We've had a big change in our law since 2013, really recognizing the victimization of minors who are commercially exploited, even when they don't think that they're victimized. We are seeing them as victims, which is an important shift. In 2015, a new law was passed allowing the victims of trafficking to seek civil remedies against convicted traffickers, restitution. Why is this important? Because many of them need to put their lives back together after they've been out of the trafficking world. They need to either go back to school if their schooling was interrupted, or they need to find a job, and they need to find safe housing. So being able to get restitution is an important thing. Some of the other changes that we've made, expungement time for juveniles selling sexual relations is immediate. That's important, again, for someone to get on with their lives. The Crime Victims Compensation Board, we've changed the rules to allow human trafficking victims are able to also receive compensation through that process. Something you may have heard about, it got a lot of press attention, I think, is that we are the first state to require all of our commercial driver's license holders to take a very basic human trafficking awareness training. It's a 20-minute video with a set of true and false questions. We are the first state in the country to require this. It took effect this past summer, something I worked on for a long time, and I'm really proud that we're the first state that's taken this step, so that's a new change. And also we added human trafficking to the list of eligible types of crimes for protection orders. That could be really helpful in some of these cases. Obviously, there's also the overarching federal crime of human trafficking. Anytime a victim is taken across a state border, it's a violation of the Mann Act, and it becomes a federal crime. So obviously, the state works on these cases, but the federal attorney for the state of Kansas also is working on these cases. So it's a combination, it's a team approach to this crime. So just briefly, I want to go over a couple of quick red flags that are more general, not necessarily to the business community. I also brought our brochures, and I'm going to leave those if anyone's interested in taking them, and many of these red flags are contained in the brochures. And these are from the U.S. Department of Education, so we're talking about school-aged children. These would be red flags if you're interacting with school-aged children. Truancy, coached or rehearsed responses, frequently running away from home. We've talked about that as being a huge vulnerability factor. Hunger, malnourishment, a boyfriend or girlfriend that's much older. A sudden change in attire or material possessions. When I go out and train school administrators, school counselors, we spend a lot of time on these sorts of things that are very specific to school-age kids. When I go out and talk to kids in high schools and middle schools, we spend a lot of time talking about the recruitment tactics that traffickers use. So I'm not going to go into those today, but those are areas that we educate other folks on. Tattoos or branding. This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about tattoos or branding. These are all images of tattoos on recovered victims of human trafficking in Kansas, again, courtesy of law enforcement. And when you look at those, you'll notice, sometimes it's a name of somebody, sometimes it's a phrase or a particular image or sign. The common denominator in all of these images is that they denote ownership over the victim by the trafficker. Oftentimes when individuals are out of human trafficking, that is one of the first things that they want to do is get the tattoo removed or have it changed or altered somehow. So they don't have that constant reminder of their time under somebody else's control. So how do you report human trafficking? Calling local law enforcement 911 if it's an emergency situation that you're witnessing, that you see something going on, it looks concerning, you feel like somebody's life might be in danger, please do call 911. If it's something that occurred that you have questions about, that's just sticking in your mind, I can't tell you how many people come to me after presentations and say, I was at this event, or I saw this person walking along my road, or that sort of thing. You can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They have experts there 24/7 who you can share this information with. They can walk through the scenario with you. You can be anonymous, you don't have to leave your name, and then they take it from there. We have an agreement with the National Human Trafficking Hotline here in Kansas that those calls are routed through the KBI, through our office, into local law enforcement. So it will get to law enforcement eventually if that's the kind of situation that you're reporting. You can also always call our office, our Victim Services Division, if you have questions. People do that all the time. Something's bothering them, or they know somebody they think might be a victim and they just want to talk. I'd be happy to talk to you about that at any time. Some of the tips for reporting human trafficking that make it really useful for law enforcement. Pay attention to your surroundings and your community. Call timely, don't wait. That's important because we all forget things after a period of time. And if you've jotted down some notes, like we were talking about in the traveling sales crew situation, it's better to call as quick as you can. Providing actionable information, details, the time of day, a description of any vehicles involved or the people, the individuals involved, and taking a picture if possible, like I said. Never approach traffickers, it's a very dangerous situation. Some of the local resources here in the Topeka area, the Y is a wonderful resource, lots of victim advocates and lots of services provided there. We're very fortunate to have that organization here in this community. There's also Restore Hope with the Topeka Rescue Mission. As Allison mentioned, I'm actually the president of the board of directors for Freedom Now, which is a new anti-trafficking nonprofit organization that's being run out of the Topeka Rescue Mission. That's another place that you can go if you have somebody that you think needs some services. We've partnered also with Rotary in doing Fresh Start bags. You all, I think, are aware of that effort, which we thank you so much for your time and all of your efforts in that area. It really does make a difference to these victims to have some of those items that they haven't had for quite some time or that they're in need of. So thank you very much for your assistance in that area. Another quick resource I wanted to mention was the BEST, the Businesses Ending Slavery and Trafficking. They really have a lot of best practices and other types of information for businesses. I'll tell you, we are in the process of setting up a training for springtime. in Kansas, and we're going to be bringing in some national experts that can train members of the business community and the hospitality industry here in Kansas. So that's something that we're working on getting set up for the spring. And these are just some more general resources. And with that, I will close. And is there time for a couple of questions? Or are we? Yes.
I have 2 questions for you. The first one is you see people on exits of the interstate and that with signs. Are they usually people being trafficked?
People who are begging, asking for food or money. I don't know the answer to that directly because I think each individual situation, the circumstances will be different. I have heard reports of people being, that they're asked to beg on the street, so I'm sure that it does happen that way, that maybe the person who's controlling them isn't right there with them, but off in the distance or in a car. So I think that is definitely one of the ways people can be forced.
And then my second question is, I've heard rumors that there are sex trafficking homes within walking distance of the state capitol, and that law enforcement knows about those places. But how is that monitored and addressed?
Are you talking about, when you say homes, are you talking about homes for victims of human trafficking, or are you talking about homes where sex trafficking is going on?
The latter.
Okay, those are 2 totally separate things. I just wanted to be sure, because there are both going on in the city. So how is that monitored? I think law enforcement, that would be a question for law enforcement. And I'm not sure how much they can share about that, because obviously they wouldn't want to tip off anybody involved in that type of thing. But I feel pretty assured that local law enforcement's on the ball with this. TPD is a great partner in these efforts. Yes?
Yes, if I go to the grocery store and buy grapes or apples or whatever, and it's made in another country, are there federal or state laws that give us assurance that children aren't being exploited to raise those fruits or vegetables that are coming into this country?
I'm sure that there are some laws that address that. I don't know specifically which ones or where to point you. I would need to look at that information and get back with you on that. I'm sure that there are, and we do get a lot of our produce, right, from Central America, Mexico, other types of places. So, right. Is that it? Sorry, I'm being cut out. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jennifer, you bet. First, we have a rotary 4-way test coin. That's a motto and credo that we live our lives by every day. We feel that you model that, so thank you. We encourage you to keep that and remind yourself of those values. And then when you see somebody else modeling that, encourage you to pass that on as well. For speaker gifts, we actually ask you to sign the bookplate. This book is Spirit Book, Highlights and Memories. And we would ask you to sign that bookplate, and then in your honor, we'll donate that to the Ross Elementary School Library.
Fantastic.
So thank you again. Folks, I think as Kansans, one thing we can be very proud of is we're the first state to declare war on human trafficking. And I think as Rotarians, one thing I'm so impressed about our organization, nationally and internationally, thank you again, Jennifer, is that we are not only focusing on helping victims of human trafficking, but as Rotarians, we not only have hearts to make a difference and make the world a better place, we are people of influence, and we know people of influence, and we are going after supply chains, and the goal with the Rotarians Against Slavery worldwide is to affect every single Fortune 500 company and have them aware of anti-human trafficking efforts and go after that from the business side. So you can be very proud to be a Kansan in our fight against human trafficking, and you can be very proud to be a Rotarian in our fight against human trafficking. Next week, we are right back in here, I believe, unless that changes, and if it does, we'll communicate that via email. We have the holiday celebration and State of the Topeka Foundation program. So it is a plated dinner and a sit-down luncheon, so please come early. The program will begin actually at 12:10, and I apologize, we'll have a little less time to network next week, but we have a delightful program, and I think some results with the foundation that we're eager to share with you, and you'll be pleased to hear. So please register for head count by no later than Monday evening, next week for next week's program. And then also remember, we have no meetings on December 27th or January 3rd. So there are no lunch meetings on December 27th or January 3rd. With that said, Jennifer mentioned she'd be willing to answer questions after we adjourn. And let's stand and say the 4 1/2 way test. Of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And is it fun? Thank you.